Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everyone. We're going to be starting very soon. We're doing something a little bit different today. Been a little while since the last stream. But this stream, we're going to be doing like a live lore exploration. And I'm going to be trying to draw some pictures as I do it. Hope you're all doing well. Okay, let's get started. Give me 1 second. I will just take these down. And this. Yay! I remembered it. Okay, hey everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're doing something a little bit different. As you can see here, I have paint up. And today we're going to be exploring the lore of the Observer, because, and the Observer is this guy, because I saw some questions already. This is the Observer, the guy from the archives, okay? This is who the Observer is. And if you remember, he disappeared, or he's still gone at the moment from the archives, at like the home screen. So basically we're going to be exploring on this stream, what happened to him? What's he been doing this whole time? Who is he? Where did he come from? Stuff like that, okay? And I'm going to be trying to draw as I do it. Not the best at drawing, mind you. Okay, so we'll start by drawing the Observer. But something I did really recently is I read through all the Arcus entries, and the Arcus entries, spelled like this, Arcus. The Arcus entries are basically the Observer's different entries whilst he's in his tower, and there's over 10,000. Mind you, I didn't have to read 10,000 entries because we don't get to see all of the entries. But there's probably, I think there's probably a few hundred, I'm not too sure. But yeah, so we're going to be exploring the Arcus entries, and what I did recently is I read through every Arcus entry and I sort of abridged them all. So I turned the 10,000 Arcus entries into like a much more manageable amount. So hopefully everyone can understand as we go through it, okay? So I'm going to be trying to cover the whole story of the Observer today, from start to finish, or like where we're up to at this point. So yeah, again, this guy is the Observer. At the moment he's gone. We're going to find out what happened to him and his story across the course of the stream. So, yeah. Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. Hello everyone, by the way. Welcome in. Thank you for coming by. Hopefully this goes well. Can you play DBD with us live on stream? I would like to do that one day for sure. We weren't expecting a live stream. Welcome in. Okay, so Arcus 01, that's where we're starting off, is the very, very start, and this is the first ever entry the Observer makes. And in this entry, he basically, let me draw the Observer. The Observer discovers a tower in the fog. He's somehow come to the Entity's realm. And he isn't too sure how or why he's there. So he discovers this strange tower. It looks a bit like a baguette, as you can see. And he says that he's been studying the entity and he's been making plans to destroy it, and he somehow found himself within the fog, within the entity's realm. Okay, so that's kind of where we start out with the character. So from here, he enters the tower and he discovers that there's been other observers, there's been other people like him living in the tower before, but they're all dead now. Tragically. But overall the vibe is that he's a little confused why he's there. He arrives into the tower, and he recalls his homeworld, which is quite important because he's from a place called Terra Primus, which isn't entirely clear what it is, but it seems to essentially be a very advanced version of Earth. The Observer is essentially like a very advanced human. Okay, so he's not really like us. It mentions later into the Arcus entries that he's maybe not human, because he does refer to humans as humans, which is a little bit odd in my opinion. So yeah, he's from Terra Primus, and he recalls nights when he would sit with his father. His father would drink whiskey, which is something he sort of later ends up doing, and he would watch the ancients swim through the night sky. So they're these, like, the ancients are presumably what the entity is, and he would watch them swimming through the night sky. So again, the entity is presumably an ancient, so wherever he was from, Terra Primus, the entity and the other ancients seem to also inhabit this world, which is very interesting. So basically the Observer seemed to live almost like side by side with these creatures before, the ancients. And he recalls his memories from this world quite positively. He remembers the art, the music, the laughter, the stories. He likes it, and he misses his father. So then we go into Arcus entry 3, and this is when, well, this is sort of the beginning of the the Observer's whole thing throughout his Arcus entries. And that's, he begins to talk to himself, which sort of just leads to his overall craziness throughout the years. And he also finds this thing called the Auris, which in this picture, see, it's this object here. It's quite an important object, and it's quite important to him. So he finds it, and he repairs it. It's sort of this, like, eye shape thing. And the Auris, if you didn't know, is basically the tool that lets him manipulate the fog, enabling him to see the memories, and look inside, okay? So that's what the Auris is. So he begins talking to himself, he repairs the Auris, and he cleans up the tower, because the tower's an absolute mess, okay? And he mentions something very interesting. He says he's on assignment. Assignment. He says he's on assignment from his from Terra Primus, okay? Which is very interesting. He makes reference to the fact that he's been sent here to watch the Ancient, which is the entity in this case. So despite him not knowing at the start, like, how he got here, he knows he has been sent here for a reason. He's been sent here to study and potentially find a way to destroy the entity. So that's very interesting. Then we enter into Arcus entry 4. So far we've got a pretty linear story as things go, right? This is when he begins to look through the different archives. He discovers these strange drawings by a mad designer. And he also discovers stories about the trapper, Evan Macmillan. But the thing about these stories is that they're different across different universes. So say we have a trapper from one universe, he acts in a certain way. I don't know, say this trapper, I don't know, kills 500 people, but then one in another universe only kills like 3 or something. there's these he finds out about 17 different versions of Evan McMillan, who's the trapper, and in some cases also he's actually fictional. He's actually not a real character in those worlds. He's it's like a story essentially. And this is when the Observer comes up with this theory, which is called the Universus Alveo. And it's the idea that with use of it's the idea that our minds can connect to the minds of people in another, or the people ourselves from another universe across the Omniverse. And it's also the idea that things that are fictional can also be non-fiction across different universes. So that's that idea, basically. Oh, this one's actually quite a big entry. I forgot about this part. He also finds a room called the Chamber of Blood in the tower, which is a room filled with lots of different stories. You can go check many of those out in the tomes and the archives. But yeah. And this is when he kind of describes the entity for the first time too. He says it's a living, breathing, all-consuming black hole. The serpent of infinity that gorges on its tail, that eats itself endlessly as it spirals downward into the cosmic Fibonacci stew that is life incomprehensible. So he's a little bit of a drama queen. This is when, in Arcus 13, the Observer discovers Haddie and Jordan. And we know Haddie and Jordan, of course. Haddie from in-game is one of many different Haddies across the Omniverse. So he discovers a Haddie and Jordan from Terra 717, which is presumably like Earth 717. And in each universe they have different names, which is another key thing he finds out. You know, the same characters in different universes aren't necessarily always called the same thing. So in Terra 1315 they're called Haley and Jaden. In Terra 238 they're called Hannah and Justin. So they're called different things in different universes. And this also extends to Haddie's powers. Haddie's powers allow her to look into things called overlaps in our sort of our main universe. They're called overlaps. They're also sometimes called fractures, different things like this. But he also discovers that in different worlds they're called borrows, they're called coils, they're called bleeds. They all have these, like, sorry, that's terrible writing. They all have these different names across different universes. But it's basically the idea that just because something is called something in one universe doesn't mean it's called something in another, which is important to keep in mind as you go through the lore, because lots of things connect, but they're not always called the same thing, for example. That's really the simplest way to put it. So yeah, and these overlaps, sorry, I would go back to the overlaps, seem to imbue strange abilities onto people. So this is the case for Haddie, where she gets her special powers. The overlaps can affect people and give them special abilities. So that's another key discovery he makes fairly early on. In Arcus 27, he discovers that several Haddie and Jordans are actually in the fog. They've been taken by the entity. So it's not just our Haddie, there's actually a bunch of other Haddies, a bunch of other Jordans who are in the fog too, which is very interesting. And he also learns of a few other lore characters, such as the Red Crane. That's a whole other story, maybe we can cover her in another stream. And yeah. We learn in Arcus 34 that the fog, which is of course just like how the entity is often represented, has inspired many stories in the Omniverse. So people do know about the entity, they do know about the fog, and people do link these disappearances to this fog. They're not completely oblivious, but a lot of them don't quite pin anything down, and he doesn't find them overly helpful when he's exploring these. Arcus 41, he finds more mad designer drawings of monsters and killers in tuxedos. How am I going to draw a tuxedo? I can draw a little tie, I suppose. So he finds monsters and killers in tuxedos. There we go. And they're done by someone called the Mad Designer, which is a lore character. And the Mad Designer is the same person who seemed to have designed the anniversary masks. I don't know if you remember those. Let me get a little image up for those. But the Mad Designer is the person who invented or supposedly designed the anniversary masks, okay? So he learns about them, and the Observer's a big fan. You know, he really likes the designs, and he finds them kind of funny, discovering these different things. Okay, so that brings us up to Arcus 42. And it's worth keeping in mind, by the way, that we don't really have much of a time scale for these different entries. It seems by the very end he's been here minimum, I would say, like years, but it's always very hard to tell, because the entity's realm doesn't necessarily have a time scale. You know, days aren't days. There's not really a day-night cycle. It's sort of just ongoing time, and the entity exists out of time, so it's really hard to kind of say, like, oh, this happened across the course of 6 years, because we have no clue. So yeah, that's that. This is when, very interesting, in Arcus 42, the Observer discovers something called unknowns, which is, you know, maybe a little bit interesting, hearing about the most recent killer, but he finds out about unknowns, and these are creatures of the fog. They're these, like, scary creatures. They usually have, like, tentacles and stuff. They're like creatures of the fog, and these creatures have special knowledge which they hide in different buildings throughout the fog. And they also hide this knowledge inside the blood of different creatures in the fog too. And these creatures can travel between different realms within the entity's realm. And the Observer makes a comment and says, like, that'd be really nice if I could do that too. Even if he'd have to kill one of these creatures, he would really love the ability to traverse through the fog. So yeah. This is when the Observer makes comment that the fog is alive and contains memories. The memories of many beings from many Terra worlds. There's lots of different people in the realm that all sort of like influence the realm. Lots of people that all come together to sort of make the realm what it is. The realm is rich with auric particles. And the realm itself and the entity is more conscious. It is more conscious than it is physical. So that's sort of why it's also hard to depict it as an actual creature, because it's more of like a thought. It's not exactly like a physical, tangible thing necessarily. And the Observer once again establishes the entity is an ancient, which we can presume, by the way, means it was alive prior to Terra Primus, which is presumably at least about 4 billion years. But presumably ancient means the entity was alive at the beginning of everything, at the beginning of the universe, we can assume. So it's very old, basically. Now in Arcus 129, we're getting on a bit here now, and in my mind it seems like he's been here maybe a couple weeks, a month, if we have to equate it to some time frame. Obviously that's a bit hard, but if we have to equate it to some kind of time frame, I would think it's been about that long. And he hears a knock at the door of his tower, which is really odd, because he's in the middle of nowhere. He can't really leave because there's this thick fog on either side that sort of stops him if he tries. and there's a knock at the door, and he's like, oh, that's strange. He goes and checks it out, and at the door, there's a bottle of whiskey, and of course he loves his whiskey. So did his dad. And it's got a note on it that invites him to the entity's birthday, which is something that sort of freaks him out a bit. He's like, oh, that's strange. Is the entity messing with me? The entity has a birthday? That's bizarre. So it's this sort of this very strange moment, but he makes note that, like, the entity is probably messing with him, probably always watching him, and it makes him just generally a bit uncomfortable, which is fair enough. So then we move on to 142. The Observer tries to sort of define the entity again. He says it's the cosmic embodiment of evil and turns worlds inside out. It extinguishes sense of empathy and compassion in communities. So this is when we learn that the entity, this evil cosmic fog being, has been consuming whole worlds. So, this basically means that the entity has absolutely destroyed worlds before, and then it's absorbed it into its fog. So in the realm, actually, there's whole parts of the realm that just contain entire worlds the entity has corrupted and consumed, which is pretty terrifying. And the entity sort of slowly infiltrates these worlds, taking them over, slowly whittling them down. It sounds like a very brutal, very dark process. And the Observer makes his first suggestion on how he thinks he could potentially kill the entity, which is to stop the trials. He kind of says that, like, well, if the entity can't feed, then it's going to die. So the trials would be the place to start that. Okay, and then Arcus 182, the Observer finds structures in the realm that remind him of his home, Terra Primus, which is a bit disturbing because it makes suggestion that potentially his world has been absorbed as well. And he also describes a bit more about Terra Primus. We find out that Terra Primus discovered that planets and solar systems and different cosmic things were alive. And the people on Terra Primus were able to actually travel between different worlds and dimensions. But even the entity is above their understanding. The entity is something they even don't understand, and they're like the most advanced sort of beings in their perspective. They find out about these higher beings, but the entity is sort of above anything they've even experienced yet, so it's sort of a scary revelation for him. So then we move on to 223. The Observer makes note that he can't really leave the tower because there's not only the fog, but he also thinks there's killers lurking in the fog. He thinks he sees them, he thinks he maybe hears them, and but he also suggests that maybe he's going a little bit crazy because he keeps looking into the Auris, he keeps viewing different memories, and he thinks it might be affecting his mental state a little bit. But he is also pretty sure he's seen monsters out there, so he's generally a bit cautious and he doesn't really want to leave. And he's also scared of them getting in. So then we go on to 293. This is when the Observer starts saying a few concerning things. The first concerning thing he says is that he says he's grateful he's in a place where there's memories to study. So when he uses the Auris and he looks into the fog, he finds out about different memories of people, different stories and different experiences, and he says he's basically grateful for the entity in that way, that the entity is so decisive and engulfs worlds, so he has something to do. So yeah. In Arcus 328, he describes the entity as a blood pudding, which looks a bit like this, I think. a cosmic blood pudding, I think he says, and that's basically all that Arcus is. He likes to describe the entity in different ways as he goes throughout his lore, and he likes to sort of do his best to depict it, even though he doesn't fully understand it. So then we move on to 337. The Observer says that bloodshed... How do I draw bloodshed? Some blood, like that? He says that bloodshed is something inherent to the entity and its existence. And he also says bloodshed is an important thing because it puts you in touch with life. So blood is sort of required to sort of be like almost like grateful for your life, because it reminds you can die. If you're not sort of aware you can die, then you're no longer as grateful or in touch with your life, which is a big reason why the entity wipes the minds of the survivors after each trial, or after each trial where they die. It wipes their minds in order to essentially keep them in touch with life. And he also says that the whole idea of like blood within the realm is a big cycle. The entity needs blood to feed on, and in return it gives blood back, which is what the blood points are, basically. Is the entity, accepts the offering and it returns it back. It's a system which feeds into itself. In Arcus 345, we learned that the entity builds the trials based on the survivors' thoughts and memories, which is why everything in the trials is so jumbled. It's why there's lots of worlds that seem very out of place, like the Temple of Purgation appearing in the Red Forest doesn't make much sense, and the temple appears very differently, but that's because that's almost like Adiris's interpretation of it. It's also why we probably have like generators in the realm too, instead of like something else. The entity probably doesn't quite understand like human things and functionality, so it sticks the generators everywhere. So yeah, in Arcus 437, the Observer is getting a bit tired. He's been through a lot at this point, but he's grateful again for the Oris, which again allows him to look into the fog and experience the memories within. And he says it's saving his sanity, because otherwise he'd be incredibly bored. But he's also saying that the Oris is sort of a double-edged sword. It's also possibly making him lose his sanity also, because the memories he experiences so frequently from within the fog are sort of like becoming a part of him. All these different people he learns about are almost like morphing into who he is now. And it's starting to mess with his head a little bit. So that's where he's at that point. Arcus 557 is next. It's quite a big one. He establishes again that the entity is pure consciousness, so it's not necessarily like a tangible being, which definitely puts a different spin on the physical world. It does have physical aspects, but the physical the physical world created, like the realm, is all something that's done through the conscious. So it's a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but that's sort of how the realm works, seemingly. The realm itself is said to be an unconscious expression of the entity. But then the realm is also sort of all of the people in the realm too. So the entity is almost like everything it's destroyed as well as itself, which is sort of what the Observer is becoming almost as well. The Observer also suggests that some people could be poisonous to the entity. This is sort of his other idea on how to destroy it, is that if you had someone inside, a bit like him, who could utilize the Oris and create certain things, it could be poisonous to the entity and could somehow sort of like destroy it from within. So yeah. In Arcus 571, the Observer hears something very strange. Yes, this will be available on YouTube after. The Observer hears something very strange out in the fog. He hears a shriek in the night. How do I draw a shriek? So some kind of shriek in the night while he's vibing in his tower. And he's a bit confused what that is. It kind of freaks him out, it wakes him up, he's put on edge. So he goes up to the roof of the tower and he decides to play some golf. Which is something he likes to do to pass the time. He plays some golf and he hits some balls off of the tower into the fog. Okay? And after this, in Arcus 572, he gets another gift at his door. And at the door, he finds a very disturbing gift. He finds a bucket full of eyeballs. Fossilized eyeballs. And it's sort of a creepy discovery, but the Observer's kind of up for it. He's like, you know what, these fossilized eyeballs would be great for my roof golfing. So he takes the eyeballs and he happily uses them to play some more golf on his roof. But again, he's getting these strange gifts, suggesting these gifts could possibly be from the entity, or potentially someone who's watching him or an ally of some kind. It's probably the entity, to be honest. In Arcus 632, so we're getting on a bit now, the Observer sees Vigo. And Vigo is sort of another character, a bit like the Observer almost, who is quite important. He makes things like, I think he made the hatch, I could be wrong on that, but he had a lab within the realm, and he seems to know a good amount about the entity. And he's another character that is able to manifest stuff. He has like a powerful mind, and he can actually sort of bend the realm's physical rules to his own will. And he's able to create things from the fog. Sort of like the Observer can. But the Observer isn't too sure how he does it. But he suggests that people in the realm are able to connect to their other selves within the Omniverse, and he suggests that Vigo has sort of done this, so Vigo has like the knowledge of a bunch of other Vigos almost. In Arcus 723, the Observer is watching a Dwight memory, but it doesn't seem to be our Dwight, it seems to be a Dwight from a different universe, I think at least. So he's watching Dwight. There we go, little Dwight drawing. He's watching Dwight. And Dwight is seemingly... first he comments on Dwight's boss, who's said to be a narcissist. And the Observer says there are 3 ways to relate to a narcissist: enable them, run from them, or destroy them. But he suggests that destroying them would cause everything to come down with them. So to me, that's always sounded like he's sort of referring to the entity. It's like he either enables the entity's behavior, he tries to run from it, or he can destroy it, but then the fear of destroying it is that the entity is going to bring everything down with it, like as in like the entire universe or multiverse, omniverse, whatever you want to say. So at least that's the kind of impression I get from reading that, is that he's saying the entity very well might take everything down with it if it wants to. So then we move on to Arcus 731. And the Observer he's getting a little bit worried. A lot of time has passed, and he has no idea how much time. The trials are still going on in the realm, and he has no idea what to do. There's nothing he can do. He's just been there for ages now. I should probably give him a bit of a beard. He slowly grows a beard as time goes on. So yeah, and the trials are still going on, and there's not much he can do about it. Then we go to Arcus 732. He looks at another Dwight memory. let's draw Dwight again. And Dwight is being offered millions of dollars. Millions. That's the dollar symbol, isn't it? Millions of dollars. In settlement money after the abuse he's gone through from his boss. So this seems to be a separate universe. I was getting the two mixed up before. Where Dwight is often offered millions in settlement, but all Dwight wants instead of the money is an apology from his boss, who's a bit of a keep making these people a bit too thin there. All he wants from his boss is an apology, and his boss is sort of he's not a very nice guy. He's a big meanie. So Dwight turns down the money, and he sort of on principle, and he says, "All I want is an apology," and he walks away. And the Observer is kind of surprised because Dwight's not really like that usually. Usually he's like, he feels it contradicts how Dwight behaves usually. But then he also says that contradictions are something that makes you human. And I think I could be wrong. I could be, my notes are saying this, but I might have written this down wrong. He says makes them human, which again sort of suggests the Observer maybe isn't human. I've always sort of read it as like, or at least he sort of thinks he's something different from them. But yeah, and it also goes to show that these characters in these different universes don't always act the same. So even if he has assumptions about a character from one universe, that doesn't mean the character's going to act the same in a different universe. In Arcus 767, we get a bit more info on the Auris, which is the tool the Observer's been using this whole time to look into the fog. And he says the Auris is a tool no one really understands. Even back on Terra Primus, again, which was this like really sort of advanced society, the people didn't understand it. They don't know what the Auris is really or how to use it properly. But the Observer, back on Terra Primus, was supposedly presenting the Auris to a council, or a council full of people from Terra Primus. He mentions the council a few times, and the council are presumably like the leaders of Terra Primus, but these people wouldn't listen to him about the Auris, and the benefits it could bring. So he's sort of a supporter of it. He doesn't understand it completely, but he knows it's important. So yeah. And he describes that the Auris works on the basis of the Trinitarian of creation. This is simply the idea that two things together can create a third. And that's pretty much the whole idea. But the inhabitants of Terra Primus, they thought alone, so like one area was enough, but the Observer sort of figures more out now, and he's you know, this experience has allowed him to use the Auris more, he kind of understands it more, and he's saying, no, we actually needed emotion as well, not just thought, in order to use this object. But the Observer also admits, as he typically does, he says, this could just be a bad theory by me. He does that quite a lot, where he sort of suggests something, but then he's like, in fairness, I could be entirely wrong. Because this is just him sort of figuring stuff out on his own. But he is a very reflective person. He's clearly quite intelligent, and stuff like that. So, yeah. In Arcus 789, he repeats again that the Auris was ridiculed by the Council. So this Primus Council seemingly ridiculed the Auris and said it was, you know, pointless, or, you know, it didn't need to be explored more. But now, almost like thinking back, he almost seems angry about the Council. He believes that he's definitely right about his theory that you need thought and emotion in order to create with the Auris. Which would make sense for the realm too, because obviously emotion is a big thing that the entity feeds on. Is Terra Primus just the name for the original universe, Earth, or is it a different thing? It's not entirely clear. It doesn't say one way or the other. I always assumed it's the first Earth because of Primus. But yeah, it could very well be a few different things. It's essentially just a very advanced Earth, seemingly, filled with humans who are able to go between different realms. They're very knowledgeable of the world, they understand it a bit differently, and yeah. So, Arcus 893, we jump forward a little bit here. The Arcus observes a number of killers going crazy within the fog. Because they've had memories of their previous trials where they've died. So something's gone wrong in the realm. And the survivors, for whatever reason, are remembering their old selves, and it drives them kind of crazy. They begin to bash their heads against walls, and because the other survivors aren't experiencing that, they're like, oh, this guy's sort of messing up our whole trial here, he's going to get us killed, so they drown him in mud, which is pretty brutal. And the observer comments that the survivors are like torches dimming. Each trial slowly whittles them away until they end up in the void. And the void is essentially just like a big sort of dumping ground for all the things the entity doesn't need anymore. All the things it's drained the energy and emotion from. So yeah. So then we move on to 968. This is when the observer notices, I think, what is the glyphs in the realm. I don't like you find in the different what are they called? The archives. There's the rift challenges. I think this is what he's referring to, because he refers to this like energy that's present, and he suggests that the glyphs are someone trying to reach him. Potentially to help him. He thinks that someone else in the realm can manifest within the entity, and he's unsure who. Presumably it's not Vigo, because otherwise he would probably say it's Vigo. So he thinks there's someone else in the fog potentially helping him. But maybe he does think it's Vigo, I'm not sure. So, 984. The observer begins to receive even more unknown luminous energy. And in this energy, it sort of opens up briefly. He can kind of like look in to this like... they're almost like these doorways, I think. And inside of this doorway, he sees a city outside of the realm. And in it is a place where survivors are living together happily. They're not in the realm, they're just vibing in this almost like nice city together, and everything is okay. And the entity thinks, oh, maybe that's because whoever this ally is, they want me to look more into the fog, and they want me to open these doorways and discover more, look more into what's within. So then we go on to 985. The observer is listening to a bit of radio from Terra Dark, which is one of the universes. I'm not actually too sure what this universe is. It might be where the entity's from, potentially. And the observer makes comment that the memories he's viewing of people all this time, because he's watched so many now, he thinks the memories of these people are almost starting to become the same as his own. They're connecting together because of how many he's viewed. And he's also saying that when he begins to view other memories entirely, he thinks he's starting to kind of impose on the memories also. So he thinks his like previous objectivity is sort of becoming a bit subjective, because his own mind might be affecting the other memories he's viewing. The other thing that's really interesting is that when he's making different notes, because he makes a lot of notes, he notes things down, when he's making notes, he sees himself beginning to write like the people he's been looking into the memories of. So that could be someone like, I don't know, like Claudette. He begins to write different thoughts down that someone like Claudette might say and not him. So it's almost like these people are becoming a part of him slowly as he looks into the memories over and over. In 986, he summons a character called the Storyteller, and he gets the Storyteller to tell him some stories. It seems to be something his dad might have previously done for him. That's meant to be a book. So he summons this person called the Storyteller, who sort of tells him some stories while he just vibes in his tower and does stuff like this. And he dreams of, or the Storyteller tells him about a story, Nosferatu. I think that's a vampire story, if I'm not wrong. Someone feel free to correct me, sorry. I think that's about vampires. And this is strange because the Observer then goes to sleep that night. Or there's not really night, but you get what I mean. And he dreams of vampires attacking his tower, which is sort of a scary experience for him. That's my little vampire there. So he dreams of vampire-like creatures infiltrating and overrunning the tower where he's living in the fog. So it's a bit of a disturbing experience, like his this kind of coming to reality, or him thinking it could come to reality. The Observer receives more of this unknown energy. Again, potentially this is like the glyphs or something like that. And this time it's a doorway that opens into a war-torn, abandoned city. Where he hears babies crying in the distance. But before he can enter into it, the door shuts. So he can't even get in. But he thinks with use of this energy and with use of the Auris, he can explore the entity further and he can find out some more mysteries and secrets. In the 1007, we're into the thousands now for the Argus entries, he sees another doorway open, so lots of doorways opening. And in this one, he sees homes which are overgrown with moss. They're stone homes, and their doorways are all like barricaded. It looks very strange. There's wagons in the way of the doors, there's planks blocking the doorways, and there's decaying bodies everywhere, tangled in barbed wire, which is a little bit creepy. And he has memories whilst he's there, and he's walking through there, of soldiers killing villagers with swords. But he has no idea what the world is, what terror world it is, and he has no idea what era it's even in. And each of these doorways, each time he kind of investigates them, he thinks, these things might be my means to get out. Maybe there's something within these worlds that, or these realms that will lead me to my salvation. Okay, then in 1032... he's looking into a memory where there's some killers and there's some strange rituals happening with like odd markings. And he jerks out of this memory because he's sort of like very confused and he doesn't like it. It's not very comfortable. But when he jerks out of this, he comes into like a realm of sorts, it seems. And it's like a cavern with different bodies. I've always thought this was maybe him experiencing Talbot's camp, the Blight. This whole, like, you know, all the strange ritual markings and all the bodies. That to me kind of sounds like Blight's camp he has on Dire Island. But potentially not. I feel like he'd be able to identify that equally because he's looked into the Blight's memories too. Um, 1043, he kind of just says there's something else to the realm than what meets the eye, which I feel like is kind of an understatement. 1118, the observer looks into the fog and he feels fear. He's starting to just generally be more fearful. He's in his tower again, and he looks into the fog, this endless fog outside his tower, and he's like, it's kind of this like overwhelming moment for him, and he realizes Terra Primus and his people, and even himself, were really arrogant almost in trying to define this living cosmic being. They barely knew anything about these, and they thought at the time they were so knowledgeable, which definitely does lead to the idea that his world was probably wiped out too, and everyone is probably dead in his world. In 1256, he's watching some Evan, looking into Evan's memories, the trappers, and he suggests that Evan was probably corrupted before he got taken, corrupted by the entity, and he suggests that Trapper's not going to like any other kind of authority figure, even if it's the entity, even if it's an ancient one, he's not going to like it. So this is basically just referring to the whole thing of Trapper like fighting back against the entity and its claws. Trapper is very sort of resistant to it, and even though the entity is this like huge being of like, completely unstoppable, the Trapper still just straight up tries to fight it. So yeah, 1275. The observer says the realm is a world made of memories. He sort of already established this, but he likes to sort of build on it as he goes. It's a collective dream of its inhabitants. So all the inhabitants in the realm make up the realm too, is basically what he's saying. But this is also important because he says reality is what we believe it to be. The realm is being made up based on what people think it is and based on what people are adding to it, which is what links back to the idea of poisoning it through being able to think a certain way or something like that, right? Okay. In 1513, the observer sees Elodie, and he basically just sees what happens in her lore, I think, when she gets stabbed by the Black Veil member, and gets taken into the realm. Elodie's entry was actually before she was added, so this was sort of just like a hint to her eventually coming. Next, he experiences something from Terra Dark, which appears to be a particularly messed up Terra world. And in this world, he views a woman who seems to lure and seduce men, robbing them of their money before feeding them to her pigs. How can I draw a pig? Okay. Before feeding them to her pigs. And I'm not too sure what the point of the story is. It's just kind of messed up. He's sort of just looking at all the messed up things happening. And that's Terra Dark. It's this like very dark world. In 2217, the observer views Claudette from another Terra world. And he makes suggestion that the entity may prefer survivors from certain universes, but not like survivors from other universes. So, if there were like two versions of like Dwight, say, the entity might only want a specific Dwight. It doesn't want this one from another universe because this one is the most beneficial to it, which is why our characters in the realm are sort of special. They're like the best versions of the characters. So yeah. And then he also does something funny. Because Claudette's very like creative, whilst he's looking into Claudette's mind, he starts having these sort of like weird thoughts, and he begins to figure out that he might not actually be experiencing Claudette's memories anymore, but instead her creative sort of like fantasies, or like, you know, things she's thinking about that have somehow managed to become reality when the observer is viewing them. So things are becoming a bit distorted at this point. In 2903, the observer, he begins to do some dodgy stuff. He's sitting down and he's watching some more memories, specifically ones about death. He seems to slowly begin to become a bit overly interested in death, to a worrying degree. He's drinking some milk from Terra 728 and listens to radio from Terra 232, and he has a big old sleep as well in this one. But the main takeaway is that he's watching death sort of like kind of on his own will now. He clearly is like a bit too enticed by it. So yeah. In 2921, the observer says that some civilizations collapse because they get knowledge they are not mature enough to understand. Which sort of seems to be what happens to his world, even though it's incredibly advanced. They weren't kind of mature enough to understand what the entity and the ancients really were. And the observer has studied the end days of many different worlds. He's seen the falls and the collapses of many different Earths, presumably. And he takes note that what the entity does is it plans almost like a perfect apocalypse in each case. The entity slowly gets its claws in, it slowly manipulates things, and it slowly corrupts a world. It's like this this very manipulative, creepy process where it does this. It's said to have fun with corrupting it. It plans a perfect apocalypse. And this also goes against what the Terra Primus inhabitants believe the ancients to be. These sort of like the ancients, like these fog beings, seemingly, and it goes against what they believed it to be. The entity is different. It's not like the other ancients. It's destructive, which apparently isn't inherent to these other ancients, which does, in my opinion at least, suggest the idea that like potentially the entity has destroyed all the other ancients. It's cut them all out, it's managed to destroy them all because it's uniquely destructive, which is a really scary idea, to be honest with you. But yeah, the Terra Primus inhabitants got that all wrong. And the observer then enters a world called Terra Arachna. And Terra Arachna is a world falling apart, and being destroyed by a bunch of spiders. This is a spider, by the way. By a bunch of spiders. And he spends a decent amount of time in this realm. There's a whole Terra Arachna story. I'll make his beard a bit longer too. There's a whole Terra Arachna story that goes on. But he basically studies this world, he kind of watches the downfall, and stuff like that. He gets a little bit worried though, because he's there for quite a while. When he returns back to the tower, he thinks one of these spiders may have followed him in. So then he writes out a special symbol on the ground to block off Terra Primus entirely. Also, not Terra Primus, Terra Arachna entirely, in order to stop anything from getting in. But he seems to like hear some scuttling, and he's a bit suspicious. There's something lurking in the tower. Maybe one of the spiders. But again, he sort of suggests that could also just be me going a little bit crazy too. Okay, so 3212. The observer sees a light in the fog. So again, he's in his tower still, and out in the dark, never-ending, endless fog, he sees a light, which is a bit odd. There's some kind of light in the fog. And he does some speculation on what it is. It has this strange rhythmic movement, he says. And again, he thinks it's like the entity maybe, and he's a bit confused about what it is, basically. Then we skip forward quite a bit. We go to Arcus entry 4902. At this point, I think he's been here like the equivalent of what would be years for us. Again, time's not really the same in the realm, but in my opinion, he's been in there like years at this point. Just because of how much he's experienced, it seems like a lot. And he makes it clear. He says, death is not an escape, which is something we're told like repeatedly in game. But death is not a means of escaping this realm. And he even says that the survivors, they're aware of the realm to a certain extent. They're aware they're trapped in something beyond their understanding. And the observer is becoming even more confused with what's happening. He was confused already, but now he's even more confused. Over the years, you know, he thought he had a decent understanding of the entity, but now he's sort of accepting that he actually has no clue what the entity is. It isn't what he believed it to be. In Arcus 5736, the observer sees into the entity's heart, which is really interesting. It's not entirely clear what it is, even, but he sees into the entity's heart. And I think the dev said that at one point, that the basement is supposedly the entity's heart. I presume it doesn't mean that though. I presume it means something else. And again, he feels really confused by it. He's like, huh? And he also feels very burdened by what he's seen. It's a very like daunting moment for him. And he also makes the suggestion again that maybe this strange ally, this thing that's been, whoever's been sending him this energy, the glyphs all along, was maybe just the entity. Maybe it's just the entity doing it all along. It's just messing with him. This whole experience in the tower has just been his own trial. That's all that's been for him. He's suggesting here. And he suggests that the entity wants him to die. He wants him to do something about that from insanity and boredom. And the observer also suggests that he's done this before. He suggests that maybe he's in this sort of loop himself, a bit like the Trials. Maybe he eternally comes back to this tower and he's in almost like this endless loop. Because I do believe when he first arrives, he finds a body in the chair, which could very well be him from another loop. After this, in Arcus 5738, the observer goes to the roof of his tower, and he lights a candle. It's nice, isn't it? He lights a candle. And then he jumps off the tower, which is, you know, not the best idea. And he jumps into the fog. Despite this, though, he wakes up the next morning just in his bed. And everything seems to be all fine. There he is in his bed. And this basically confirms to him, oh, death is not an escape. You know, he tries to jump off the tower and into the fog, and he confirms, nope, that doesn't work. In 5798, the observer is still very confused. And now something really bad is happening to him. Now he's no longer able to decipher his own thoughts from those of others. So I remember I mentioned before how other people are slowly becoming a part of him. Now he doesn't actually know which thoughts are his own and which thoughts are other people's. He's that deep into this. He's experienced so many memories through the Auris that he's not even sure which memories are his own and which are that of people he's viewed, which is a really scary thing, to be honest with you. And this sort of leads him to begin almost like indulging in and enjoying more sadistic memories. He begins to watch back more violent and kind of murdery memories. And yeah, he's generally just becoming a pretty I don't know, he's clearly changing from this experience. And he says that when he looks in the mirror, he sees many different faces, but he does not see his own. So he punches the mirror because he's angry, and he begins to bleed. So he's going pretty crazy at this point. In Arcus 7294, the Observer awakes soaked in blood, which is a bit strange, isn't it? He's soaked in blood. And he has no memory of what happened the night before. He has a cut on his head too, but he's not sure, again, what caused it. He doesn't know what's going on. He's very confused at this point. And by his bed, he finds a very strange thing. He's got a little bed here. He finds a big purple mound of flesh and gore, which is an odd thing to find, isn't it? And he's like, oh, that's odd. How did that get there? So he cleans himself up, presumably also kind of treats his wound. He goes over to a window of the tower and he tosses everything out into the fog. Which I think is quite funny. It's like, instead of like, you know, the way he cleans things up is he just tosses it out the window. But yeah, so some strange things are happening in his tower now as well. Almost like, to me, it almost seems like his tower is somewhat a reflection of his mind, you know? In 7465, the Observer does something pretty smart, to be honest with you. And probably the smartest thing he's done since he's got here. He attempts to focus on himself. He wants to ignore other memories for a little bit. And he wants to focus on himself, and he wants to remember his homeworld, Terra Primus. And he wants to try and get back in touch with who he is, basically. But despite this, he keeps getting flashes of the survivors' memories. Again, he can't really tell himself apart. So yeah, now what he does, a bit like we're doing now, he decides to look back on all the Arcus entries he's written, which at this point is 7,456 Arcus entries. So he takes a look at the Arcus entries, and he's like, oh, maybe these are going to help me remember who I am, basically. In Arcus 7525, the Observer wakes up to find empty whiskey bottles inside of the tower. Not only this, but he finds a bunch of dead bodies. Again, inside the tower as well, which is a little bit concerning. He finds dead bodies, and this is all on his roof, by the way. And he finds a bloody golf club nearby, which is a bit sus, because, you know, he likes his golf. And he turns the bodies over to get a look at them, because they're all, like, turned over. And interestingly, they look like the people who sent him to this tower in the first place, who sent him to investigate the entity to begin with. Which I presume is that council, the council I mentioned before, remember, from Terra Primus. I think it's them, because he mentions he doesn't like them, so it makes sense if it was these people. So he thinks he might have conjured these people with use of the Auris and the fog, again with the whole idea of emotion and thought create something. He thinks he might have conjured them and then killed them all because he hates them that much. Potentially even like subconsciously doing this now because he doesn't remember it. So yeah, and he makes reference to the fact that he has a whole journal. He has a whole journal detailing ways he would like to kill the people who sent him here, which is very dark. So yeah, and they're stated to be dark and creative ideas, which is, I think, quite disturbing. And presumably, again, they're these council members from Terra Primus who sent him here, and who kind of initially said the Auris is nothing to, think about, and all these different things. They didn't listen to him. So he thinks up these dark and creative ways to kill them, and he thinks maybe those dead people on the roof that were beaten by a golf club were probably his doing. He probably did it subconsciously, or he doesn't remember. And I think he throws them off the tower again. he disposes of everything by just tossing it out the tower. So then we're on to 7547. The Observer uses whiskey. He uses whiskey, which is probably not the best way to do something, to dream of his home, friends, and family. And after doing this, he wakes up and he finds out the tower, or the inside of the tower, is completely wrecked. It's destroyed. Different paintings he's made have been destroyed. Different statues he sculpted himself were destroyed. All he has now are days full of whiskey, screams from outside the fog. There's still screams happening outside the tower, and coming in that he can hear, and broken memories. So the only way he feels he can get in touch now with his original self in his homeworld is through whiskey, which is not the best. He's unsure which memories are his own now and which are other people's, and he feels the only way to get in touch with his actual memories is through alcohol, which is not good. So we jump forward quite a bit again to Arcus 8282. The Observer finds a number of heads inside something called the Den in the tower. And he recognizes some of them. I don't think he says who he recognizes. They could just be the council members again, maybe. And he makes a cairn out of them outside his door, which I think is basically just he piles them up in sort of like a burial fashion. And when he's done, these dead heads begin to talk to him, which is a bit strange, isn't it? So he shuts his eyes. He shuts his eyes, and when he reopens them, the heads are gone. They've disappeared. He goes back inside and he reads some more stories from the Chamber of Blood and looks through some more creations by the Mad Designer, because he wants to sort of, I think a lot of these things are to get back in touch with his like earlier days, when he first arrived in the tower, when he liked to do stuff like that. I think that's why he's doing that. On to Arcus 8542. The Observer becomes more aware that there's creatures out in the fog. He looks out the windows and he sees these creatures lurking within the fog. But these creatures, they don't attack him. They don't attack him yet. But he starts to become very nervous about them lurking outside. So he begins to block off all the windows. He blocks off the doors. He basically makes sure that the tower is very secure. And he's up on the roof, and he does some more practicing with his golf club, ready if they attack, so he can hit them all with his golf club. So yeah. But he also notices that the creatures in the fog, they keep changing. And he thinks they might change based on what the Observer is fearing, and the and almost changing based on what he's imagining them to be, you know? Which also suggests he might be the one willing them into existence. He might be, you know, he's in such a self-destructive state that he's maybe creating the very monsters he is fearing, you know? I think that's a way to look at it. In 8545, the Observer is again awoken by screams and destruction out in the fog. So there's more screams from the fog, and there's noises of destruction. So he goes and he looks out into the fog, and he sees things coming to life and then suddenly dying, and they keep coming to life and dying. And he's a bit confused by it, but he thinks, huh, maybe something is happening to the entity. Maybe the entity is in shock. And he describes it as some form of cosmic indigestion. Almost like the entity is like heaving or trying to get rid of a sickness. This could maybe be the blight, possibly? The blighted substance, which is something the entity needs to purge every year. Or frequently in the realm, or like sort of it's like a regular occurrence in the realm. So maybe it could be something like that, I'm not too sure. But it's weird how it causes these creatures in the fog to, or not necessarily creatures, but these like beings in the fog to come to life and then suddenly die over and over. It's a very strange thing to happen. So then we move on to 8557. The Observer feels scared, which is oh, hey everyone. Thank you, Zombie, for the membership. I appreciate that. Thank you. The Observer is scared. He's feeling scared. Now there's an actual attack happening to the tower. There's squid-like creatures trying to infiltrate the tower. These scary squid-like creatures trying to climb the tower. I think there's actually I'll try and bring up an image. One sec. I forget the cutscene. Maybe someone can remind me the cutscene. But there's these squid-like creatures, and they begin like scaling the tower. So what the Observer does, he's been hyping himself up with his golf club this whole time, but he's like, nah, not doing that. So he takes the Auris and some other valuables, and he escapes into another realm through a doorway. So he just dips with all the stuff he needs, basically. And when he comes back to the tower, when he thinks it's safe, he finds that everything has been destroyed. But he also finds that all these strange squid-like creatures that were attacking the tower, all of these are dead. And he thinks that the entity probably sent them, and so he does his signature move of tossing them out the tower window. Yeah. So then we move on to 8789. The Observer finds even more dead bodies in the tower, this time in his study, and he again, you guessed it, tosses them out the window into the fog. And he thinks again that he might have actually created these bodies this time that he's tossing out. And he suggests maybe he became someone else briefly, because he's so integrated with the minds of other people now. He thinks maybe he became one of the realm's killers even. Like, in his mind, he thought he was that killer. And then he manifested some people to kill, basically. So yeah, he's confused by what's even happening at this point. And yeah. In 8875, the Observer finds... the Observer is watching some memories. So he's still watching memories. He knows it's like this destructive habit, but he's still doing it. He's watching this memory of a survivor trying to escape, but they've severed their femoral artery and they're suffering. They're They're like bleeding out. It's a really painful process. But the observer is like, it makes him happy. He's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And it's like, oh, what's that, observer? You think that's cool? That's concerning. That's disturbing. But yeah, he finds it like entertaining. I think he said it's like funny or something. I can't remember. And he kind of he's almost like repeating what he's thinking at this point. And he says, this is probably why the entity wipes their memories, because they need to feel like death is real. Which again is like, it's a bit concerning because he figured that out about like about 8,000 entries ago. So he seems to sort of be stagnating and backtracking a lot now. And he's enjoying murder and violence a lot, and even potentially subconsciously entering into states of violence where he's summoning things and then killing them, which is pretty disturbing. So now we're up to 9,082. The observer is once again watching some more memories that are pretty disturbing. He watches a memory from Billy, who attacks a farmer and kills him. He does it with like a shovel or something. And he says, oh, this memory where this farmer gets brutally murdered, that's one of my favorites. I love this one. So again, a little bit concerning on the observer side. He's starting to really enjoy these like twisted memories. We jump forward even further now. We're at Arcus 9873. And remember, when we started out, we were at 01 of the Arcus. So he's probably been here years. Again, like I've said before, time probably isn't like a set thing, but he's probably been there years at this point. And in 9873, he watches a memory where David King is dealing with one of his like debt jobs, and there's this poor guy who's like not paid his debt, so David pours gasoline onto him and flicks a match toward him. And the observer, he loves it again. He's like, yeah, enjoying these sort of twisted memories. But then the gasoline turns out to be fake. It's not real gasoline, so he doesn't burn him. But he does this all to make him repay a loan. And the observer says it's one of his favorites. So basically, it's just really hammering home that the observer is like, he kind of like loves violence and death and blood and, you know, all these horrible things now. He's sort of vibing with that aspect. He doesn't view it now and it's like, oh my god, this is so horrible. How could the entity do these things? Now he's like, yay, more violent memories. So he's losing his humanity quite clearly. So yeah, he enjoys the darkness and the realm in many ways. Okay, now on to 9966. The observer finds out about a story from a man named Bara. And Bara's like a lore character. I think he's called Cliff Bara. And he writes horror stories. And in this story, this story is about a character called The Prisoner. And in this story, the prisoner is in a dark dimension. Named The Horror. And it's a dimension he can't escape, and all horror originates from this dimension. Sounds familiar, In 9967, he comments on this again and says, the prisoner experiences memories from a fog. Sounds like someone we know. And after this prisoner spends years looking into the fog, which does suggest the observer has been there years, he finds a way out of the fog through the ruins of a castle. which is interesting. And in order to open this, he plays a vinyl, which is like a record, which opens this doorway up. That's my record player. And after he does this, he finds a way out. But in order to do this, he has to go through the void. And remember, this is all just fictional. This is a story he's reading about from a man named Bara, but it's like weirdly lining up with what he's experiencing, right? And remember from before that fiction and non-fiction can both be the same across different universes. Something that isn't real in one universe can be real in another. So this story about a man very similar to him discovering a way out of this creepy entity-like realm within the void sort of gets the observer to think like, huh, maybe I could do a prisoner move and I could try and jump into the void and explore what's down there. Maybe I could get out that way. But he's also thinking, hey, that's pretty odd, because maybe the entity just wants me to jump into the void, and then I'm going to be there for eternity and in a much worse spot than I am now. So he also thinks it might just be the entity sort of baiting him. But he is intrigued by the possibility that there's escape on the horizon through this story by Bara of the prisoner and an entity-type realm. Okay, so Memory 9970. The observer is studying this story of the prisoner and Bara quite a lot, but he's not entirely sure if the prisoner succeeded, because that part of the story is not there. So again, he's very reluctant to go through with entering into the void, in case it means, you know, it's all just bait and he ends up dying, basically listening to what was just a story. And this is when he begins to investigate Bara's works more. And he finds out about 100 different stories, which details the lives of people who are in the fog. And in one story, a group of survivors managed to also escape through the void, through an opening. And they do this with use of different, strange symbols and with a scroll. And they carve these symbols into some kind of strange growth. And the observer thinks, hey, maybe I need these symbols to get out myself. So he can attempt an escape. He thinks otherwise he has most of what he needs now to escape, but he thinks maybe I need these symbols to actually get out of the realm. So he's trying to find these different connections. And now we're at like the very end. I think this is the last entry actually. This is Arcus 10,187. So we've come a long way. It's probably been years inside the realm at this point. And the observer has taken the leap and he's in the void. And he says he's been traveling through the void for weeks. In the void, he sees endless bodies. Again, this is like the dumping ground of, all the people the entity has no use for, all the people drained of their emotion and energy. This is like it's just this horrible wasteland of death. So the observer now is traveling through it. And he's going through endless bodies, and he keeps entering into different discarded realms, because there's whole worlds in the entity's realm that are just have been consumed and destroyed by the entity. So he's walking through these different destroyed worlds and this endless stream of bodies. And the void is much worse than what this writer Bara had described, and it's gotten the observer pretty concerned. let's give him a longer beard. And now he's beginning to feel a bit unsure if anyone ever escaped from the void, now that he's finally down here. And that's where we leave off from him, with the Observer. In Arcus 10,187, seems to be his last entry for now. He's down in the void, he's trying to find a way out, and yeah. So there we go. That's my abridged version of the Observer's story. I hope you liked that. I'm not sure. I hope it was easy enough to follow. I hope I was concise enough and whatnot. Yeah. How's everyone doing? I'm sorry, I've been really focused. I've not been looking at chat too much. Thank you, MG. I'm glad you loved it. So that's where we leave the story off. Maybe we could have some questions now. Does anyone have any questions about the good old Observer and anything we've just covered in that story? Nice. Because it's quite a lot. Very good stream, thank you. I know it's something a little bit different. Thank you, Neo. But yeah, that's the story of the Observer. He's vibing in the void at the moment. After all that he's been through. Does the entity have a big heart? I mean, I would think so. It's got a pretty big realm. I'm not too sure what it means when he says he looks into the heart of the entity. I'm not entirely sure what what that could mean. Because it can't just be the basement. I feel that's too I don't know. That doesn't seem extreme enough. So yeah. You're making some licensed characters for the DBD board game. That's very cool. So yeah, there we go. That's our boy, the Observer. That's his story. And yeah. I'm actually glad that didn't take too long. I feel like I got through that pretty quickly. Who would you cast as the Observer in the DBD movie? I honestly don't know. That's a good question. I'm not good with something like that. I'd leave it down to whoever ends up casting it. I don't think he's going to be in the DBD movie, mind you. I assume he probably won't be in it. You just got here. Well, okay. The stream's pretty much over at this point. We just finished retelling the entire story of the Observer through the Arcus entries. And yeah, that was the point of today's stream, basically. Who is Vittorio? You mean like the survivor? I mean, Vittorio is someone who found knowledge of the Observers prior to the realm, so he did some research. He was trying to find this special stone called the Lapis something or other, I forgot what the name was. But he finds out about the Observers, basically, and their goal to sort of take down the entity. But then he gets locked up by Tahos, and he eventually comes to the realm himself, and he does seem to come across the Observer's tower at one point, potentially. Kurt Russell would be a good Observer. That's not a bad choice. How old is the Observer? Does time pass in the realm? Again, I don't think time necessarily works in the same way in the realm as we sort of view it ourselves. But time definitely passes, because the Observer, you know, he does grow a beard, he does experience the passing of time. He's not entirely, he does seem to age even, I would think. But that's also unique to his case, because obviously the survivors don't. They don't change. So yeah. The guy who made the hatch was presumably Vigo, who's this character that the Observer mentions, is a bit like him. He's able to manifest things from the fog, and so he presumably manifested the hatch in order to help the survivors and also help himself when he was more than likely in the trials too. Oh, thank you. It's very kind. Next live, I'm not too sure. I might try and do another one of these streams next week. We might do the Red Crane potentially next week. Because there's lots of stories from within the fog that we never actually see. But yeah, the Vittorio is definitely a character who has more knowledge about the realm than most other people. Even probably characters like Elodie and stuff like that. Is the Observer trapped in the fog? The Observer is trapped in the fog, seemingly. He's in his tower. And his tower is surrounded by fog. So he has his tower, but the tower is surrounded by fog. And when he tries to step out, it's sort of like very like windy almost, and it like pulls him around. It's dangerous to go out basically. And like we've seen, if he does try and do something like jump off into the fog, he just ends up back inside the tower. So yeah. This video will be available as, or this live stream will be available as a video afterwards, so you can always go watch it in full there. Oh, that looks like very basic shapes. It's about 3 PM for me. So yeah, I think that's pretty much going to do it. If there's any other final questions, you can let me know now, and then I'll probably end the stream. But I do hope you enjoyed it. Why doesn't the entity put him in the trials? Either because it wants him in the tower and it wants him to be in this place to suffer, because he does suggest, remember, in the Arcus entries that the trial, that this tower and his whole experience might be his trial. It's just another way the entity's feeding, potentially. And it's also suggested that there's also some kind of magical properties to the tower that's protecting anything from getting in. It could even be the Observer's own mind which protects the tower, because once his mind begins to crumble, the tower also begins to lose its defenses. So that could be a possibility too. Does the Observer have a real name? I don't think he does. He's just referred to as the Observer. But he probably did have a name. It's just that in the fog it's not really relevant necessarily, because it's just him. Does the fog have any purpose besides hunting and protecting the tower? Besides protecting the tower, it doesn't. I mean, the fog is essentially the entity. It's the realm. It's what contains all the memories. So its purpose is like, well, it's the realm itself almost. So like that's its purpose. I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. I'm sorry. I will try and answer it though. I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what the question is there. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. We will remove them. Yeah, so I'm not sure what that means either. Okay, I think that's gonna do it. Oh, okay, if the fog can hunt. Is that what you mean? If the fog in Dead by Daylight can hunt. I mean, it seems to follow the will of the entity. So, you know, potentially in that way you could consider it to be like, it could be able to hunt things, I suppose. It definitely it follows the will of the entity for the most part. So I would say I guess you could say it can like hunt things down, yeah. So yeah, let's leave it off there. I do hope you enjoyed. That was my little retelling of The Observer. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for watching. Again, I hope you enjoyed. Appreciate you all coming along. And yeah. Thanks for watching. And okay, I'll answer this question quickly. What tome was the last time we got news on The Observer? This tome, the current tome, is the last time. Thanks, and good.